The champagne flute felt like ice against my fingers, a stark contrast to the simmering warmth of victory in my veins. From across the grand ballroom, my sister Clara was a vision in white satin and stolen dreams. She laughed, a tinkling sound that had always grated on my nerves, clinging to the arm of the man she thought was her husband. Our mother stood beside her, beaming with proprietary pride, her gaze sweeping over the opulent room as if she had personally woven the silk tapestries hanging from the walls. They were the queens of the hour, celebrating the culmination of a lifetime of scheming, marrying Clara into the formidable Thorne family. "You should go congratulate your sister, Ilara," my mother hissed, gliding up to me. Her smile was a perfect, venomous curve. "Try to look happy for her. It's the least you can do after all she's had to put up with. Put up with me." The quiet one, the plain one, the stepping stone upon which Clara had gracefully, cruelly climbed. I offered a placid smile, a mask I had perfected over 2 lifetimes. "Of course, I'm just so overwhelmed with joy for them." My gaze drifted to the small, ornate table near the ballroom entrance, where the official documents had been signed just an hour before. Tucked safely in my clutch was a certified copy of the marriage certificate. On the line designated for the bride, next to the bold, confident signature of Julian Thorne, was my name, Ilara Vance. Clara caught my eye from across the room, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of her usual irritation that I dared to exist in her orbit on her special day. She then raised her glass to me in a mock toast, her expression smug and dismissive. She thought this was her final ultimate triumph. She thought she had won. She didn't know that she had already lost everything. In her previous life, this party had been the beginning of her ascent and my tragic end. In this life, it was her public execution, and I was holding the axe. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, the bubbles fizzing on my tongue like nascent vengeance. The real celebration hadn't even started yet. My first life was a masterclass in quiet suffering. I was born the elder daughter, but from the moment Clara arrived 2 years later, I became a ghost in my own home. Clara was the sun, bright, dazzling, and demanding all the attention. I was the shadow she cast. She had our mother's flawless skin and our father's charming smile. I had a quiet disposition and a love for books. In our family's calculus, it was no contest. It started with small things. If Clara and I both wanted the same toy, it was mine that was accidentally broken. If she scraped her knee, it was my fault for not watching her closely enough, and I would be sent to my room without dinner. Our father, a man perpetually distracted by his foundering business, was a peripheral figure. He saw what our mother wanted him to see: one perfect daughter and one difficult, sullen one. He never questioned the narrative. It was easier not to. As we grew, the injustices escalated. In middle school, I spent a month painstakingly painting a landscape for the city's youth art competition. The night before it was due, my mother came into my room. "Clara is so upset," she said, not looking at my painting, but at me, her eyes cold. "She tried so hard on her project, but it's just not very good. It would break her heart to lose." The next day, my painting was submitted with Clara's name on it. It won first prize. Clara posed for the local paper with my art, her smile radiant. When I tried to protest, my mother slapped me, a sharp, shocking sting that echoed for days. "Don't you dare try to ruin this for your sister," she whispered, her voice a thread of steel. "Your jealousy is so unbecoming." That was the day I learned that my talents were not my own. They were a resource to be mined for Clara's benefit. My high school essays were plagiarized for her English class. My meticulously researched science project became hers. I was her ghostwriter, her secret tutor, her unseen engine. In return, I was allowed to exist in the quiet corners of the house, fed and clothed, a debt my mother reminded me of constantly. The ultimate betrayal came when it was time for college. I had dreamed of attending the country's most prestigious design university. My portfolio was my soul, poured onto paper over sleepless nights. I was accepted with a full scholarship. I remembered holding the acceptance letter, the heavy, embossed paper feeling like a ticket to a new life. It was the first time I had felt a spark of hope in years. That hope was extinguished a week later. My mother and Clara sat me down in the living room. "We've had a long talk," my mother began, her tone oozing with false sympathy. "Clara's grades. Well, they aren't what they should be, and this university you want to go to is so far away. You're a quiet girl, Alara. You wouldn't handle it well." "I got a scholarship," I whispered, clutching the letter that was still in my pocket. "About that," Clara said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "It turns out the scholarship is transferable to a sibling if the original recipient is unable to attend. A family emergency, for instance. They had fabricated a story. They told the university I'd had a sudden, severe breakdown and was being institutionalized. They produced a forged letter from a doctor. They enrolled Clara in place, my scholarship, my dream. When I screamed, when I cried, when I raged against the sheer, breathtaking injustice of it all, my father finally intervened. He told me to stop being selfish. He told me I was tearing the family apart. He told me to be happy for my sister. I stayed home, enrolled in a local community college, while Clara lived my dream. She squandered it, of course. She partied more than she studied, her grades were mediocre, and she dropped out after 2 years, claiming the curriculum stifled her creativity. But it didn't matter. She had the prestige of having attended, another shiny bauble to add to her collection. The final act of my first life was centered around Julian Thorne. He was the sole heir to a global logistics empire, a man whose name was whispered with awe in our city. His family was old money, power, and influence. A marriage to Julian Thorne was more than a wedding. It was a coronation. And my mother was determined that Clara would be the one crowned. They needed a way in, an introduction, and once again, I was the key. Through my quiet work at a local architectural firm, I had been part of a junior team consulting on a new philanthropic project funded by the Thorne Foundation. I was tasked with researching historical preservation techniques, a niche passion of Julian's grandmother. I worked tirelessly, and my research was exceptional. It earned me a brief, formal meeting with Julian to present my findings. He was nothing like the ruthless tycoon the papers described. He was serious, intelligent, and surprisingly gentle. He listened to my presentation with genuine interest, asking insightful questions. For 20 minutes, I felt seen. I felt like a person. My mother and Clara saw an opportunity. They coached me for days before the meeting. "Mention Clara, talk about her passion for art. Tell him she's the creative genius of the family," my mother instructed. I was to be a bridge, and once Clara had crossed it, it would be burned behind her. I did as I was told. I felt the familiar shame curdle in my stomach as I fed him the lines they'd written for me. Julian, ever polite, nodded. Afterward, my mother used the connection I had made to engineer a chance encounter for Clara at a charity gala. Clara, with her dazzling beauty and practiced charm, did the rest. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Our family was ecstatic. My father's business, which had been teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, was suddenly flooded with investments from Thorne-affiliated partners. My mother ascended to the highest echelons of the city's social scene. Clara was insufferable, flaunting her enormous diamond ring and planning the wedding of the century. I was the silent, forgotten architect of their success. They treated me with more contempt than ever, as if my very presence was a reminder of the deceit their happiness was built on. A week before the wedding, I came down with a sudden, violent illness. The doctors were baffled. I was weak. I was in constant pain, and I was fading. My mother dismissed it as a stomach bug and an attempt to steal Clara's thunder. She refused to postpone the wedding festivities. On the day of the wedding, I was lying in a hospital bed, my body shutting down. A nurse, a kind woman with sad eyes, held my hand. "Your family should be here," she murmured. They weren't. They were at the wedding. My last conscious thought was the image of Clara in her wedding dress, smiling as she sealed my family's fortune and my death sentence. I learned later, in the echoing void between worlds, the truth. It wasn't an illness, it was poison. A slow-acting, untraceable compound my mother had been putting in my tea for weeks. I had become a loose end, a liability. My knowledge of their fraud was a threat to their perfect new life, so they had simply erased me. My death was not an end. It was a release, a moment of perfect cold clarity. As the light faded, all the pain, all the injustice, all the silent screams of my life coalesced into a single, burning point of energy. And then I gasped, my eyes flying open. I wasn't in a hospital. I was in my childhood bedroom, the pale morning light streaming through the curtains. My hands, which had been skeletal and frail, were healthy. I scrambled out of bed and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I was 19 again. My face was unlined, my eyes clear. I snatched my phone from the nightstand. The date was 3 years before the wedding, 1 week before I was scheduled to present my research to Julian Thorne. I hadn't just survived, I had returned. And with me, I brought the one thing my family could never take from me: the truth. A furious, vengeful, and exquisitely detailed memory of everything they were going to do. The shock was a physical blow, a wave of nausea and vertigo that sent me staggering back to my bed. For a full day, I did nothing but lie there, the flood of memories from my past life washing over me. The pain, the humiliation, the final agonizing moments in that sterile hospital room. It was all so real, so raw. It felt like it had happened only yesterday. Tears streamed down my face, not of sorrow, but of rage. A cold, hard fury began to solidify in my chest, displacing the fear and confusion. I had been given a second chance, an impossible, miraculous, glorious second chance. I could just run. I could change my name, move to a different country, and disappear from their lives forever. I could live in peace, free from their poison. But the thought of them succeeding, of Clara on Julian's arm, of my mother preening in high society, all of it built on my stolen life and my murder, it was unacceptable. Peace wasn't enough. Escape wasn't enough. I wanted justice. No, justice was too sterile a word. I wanted retribution. I wanted to take a torch to the pristine facade of their lives and watch it all burn. I wanted them to feel a fraction of the helplessness and despair they had inflicted on me, and that was the turning point. Lying in my bed, the 19-year-old me with the mind of a murdered 22-year-old, I made a conscious decision. I would not be a victim this time. I would not be a stepping stone. This time, I would be the architect of my own life and of their destruction. My foreknowledge wasn't just a shield, it was a weapon, and I would learn to wield it with surgical precision. My plan began to form not as a vague desire for revenge, but as a series of cold, calculated steps. In my previous life, they had used me as the bridge to Julian Thorne. This time, I would build that bridge for myself, and I would kick them off it into the abyss. First, I needed to sever their control over me. That meant financial independence. In my past life, I remembered my father lamenting a stock market crash that had nearly wiped him out. He'd sold all his shares in a small, obscure tech startup called Innovate Dynamics, just a week before it was acquired by a giant corporation, sending its value into the stratosphere. He'd bemoaned his bad luck for months. His bad luck was now my golden opportunity. I had a small savings account, a few $1,000s I'd scraped together from part-time jobs. It was meant for textbooks and supplies. Instead, I quietly liquidated it. Using a new online brokerage account my parents knew nothing about, I poured every single cent into Innovate Dynamics stock. It felt like a gamble, but it wasn't. It was a certainty. Second, I had to change the narrative of my meeting with Julian Thorne. I was scheduled to present my research on historical preservation. Last time, I was a nervous, meek girl who dutifully recited Clara's praises. This time would be different. I spent the next week not just refining my professional presentation, but also researching Julian himself. Not the public persona, but the private man. I vaguely remembered a news snippet from my past life about a terrible fire at one of his family's historical estates a few months from now. A place that housed his late grandmother's cherished art collection. It was a tragedy that was said to have deeply affected him. The cause was eventually found to be faulty wiring from a recent renovation. That was my entry point. It was more than an entry point. It was a battering ram. Finally, the most crucial part of the plan, Clara herself. My sister was a creature of habit and vanity. Her cruelty was as predictable as the sunrise. I didn't need to push her into a trap. I just needed to lay it out and let her own character do the work. The trap was the marriage itself. She wanted the prize, the status, the name. I would let her believe she was getting it, right up until the very last second. I would let her plan the wedding, wear the dress, and smile for the cameras. The greater her public triumph, the more devastating her public fall would be. The swap on the marriage certificate wasn't just a last-minute trick. It would be the logical conclusion of a long, carefully executed campaign. It required Julian to be a willing participant. He had to choose me. Not because I tricked him, but because he saw me, valued me, and wanted to be my partner. I had to earn his trust and his affection, and I had to do it while systematically proving to him that the family he was considering aligning with was a nest of vipers, so the new plan was set. Phase 1, secure capital. Phase 2, captivate Julian Thorne. Phase 3, let Clara destroy herself. Phase 4, take everything. I logged out of the brokerage account, the order confirmation for the stock purchase glowing on the screen. The fear was gone, replaced by a chilling calm. The game had begun. They thought they were the players, but they didn't know the board had been flipped. This time, I wasn't just a pawn. I was the queen. 1 week later, I walked into the Thorne Corporation headquarters. The building was a monument to power, all glass and steel and quiet, expensive art. In my past life, I had been trembling, my notes clutched in sweaty hands. This time, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I was not here as a supplicant. I was here as an equal, though he didn't know it yet. I was led to a top-floor conference room with a view that stretched across the entire city. Julian Thorne stood by the window, silhouetted against the skyline. He was exactly as I remembered, tall, impeccably dressed with an air of quiet intensity. "Miss Vance," he said, turning. His eyes were a startlingly clear blue. "Thank you for coming." "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Thorne," I replied, my voice steady. I began my presentation. I was crisp, professional, and passionate. I didn't just present the data. I told a story about the buildings, about the people who had lived in them. I saw his interest peak. He leaned forward, his focus entirely on me. This time, there was no mention of Clara, no false praise for her non-existent creative genius. This was my moment. After I finished the official presentation, I paused. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my tone shifting from professional to gravely serious, "may I speak with you frankly about a matter of some urgency? It's outside the scope of this project, but it pertains to your family's legacy." He looked surprised, but gestured for me to continue. "I was reviewing the schematics for the recent renovations at the Northwood estate as part of my research." I lied smoothly, my heart pounding. "I noticed the electrical contractors used a T12 series wiring system. My father is an electrical engineer, and he's always warned me that this particular series has a documented history of overheating, especially in older structures with high humidity. It's been linked to several fires." His brow furrowed. "Our contractors are the best in the business. They assured us everything was up to code." "I'm sure it is, technically," I said, choosing my words with care. "But codes can lag behind field data. Given the value of the art collection housed there, especially your grandmother's pieces, I felt a moral obligation to mention it. An independent inspection might be prudent. It's better to be safe than to be sorry." I could see the internal debate in his eyes. He was weighing the potential hassle against the unthinkable risk. His grandmother's collection was priceless to him. "Thank you, Miss Vance," he said finally, his voice tight. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. I'll have my team look into it immediately." I had planted the seed. Now I had to wait. 2 weeks later, my Innovate Dynamics stock exploded. The acquisition was announced, and my small investment ballooned into a fortune. It wasn't Thorne-level wealth, but it was more than enough. It was freedom. I quietly transferred the funds to a new bank account under my name only, then I packed my bags. When I told my family I was moving out, they were stunned. "Moving out?" my mother scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. You can't afford it." "I can," I said simply. "I've found a nice apartment downtown." "With what money?" Clara demanded, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Did you steal from us?" "I've been saving," I said, the lie tasting sweet. "I'm an adult. It's time I was on my own." They couldn't stop me. My father, seeing a chance to cut an expense, readily agreed. My mother was furious. Not because she would miss me, but because she was losing her unpaid servant and ghostwriter. Clara was incensed that I would dare to have a life independent of her. Their reactions only confirmed that I was making the right choice. Moving out wasn't just about independence, it was about self-preservation. I couldn't risk my mother trying her poison recipe again. 3 days after I moved into my new sunlit apartment, I received a phone call from an unknown number. "Miss Vance, it's Julian Thorne." His voice was different. The cool professionalism was gone, replaced by a raw, profound gratitude. "There was a fire at the Northwood estate last night. A small one. It was contained to the West Wing service ducts, exactly where you indicated the faulty wiring was." I closed my eyes, a wave of relief washing over me. My memory had been accurate. The inspector said if it hadn't been discovered, the entire wing, including my grandmother's gallery, would have been gone within the hour, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved it. You saved everything." "I'm just glad everyone is safe, Mr. Thorne," I said softly. "Please call me Julian, and I owe you a debt I can never repay. I'd like to thank you properly. Would you have dinner with me this week?" Phase 2 had just clicked into place. Our first dinner was at a quiet, elegant restaurant that he owned. We didn't talk about business or architecture. I let him see the person my family had tried so hard to erase. I talked about my love for classic literature, my passion for design, my dream of starting my own firm one day. He spoke of the immense pressure of his family's legacy and his desire to make his own mark on the world. He was sharp, witty, and beneath the billionaire armor, surprisingly vulnerable. We connected on a level that was deeper than anything my sister could ever fake. Meanwhile, my family was in a panic. Their carefully planned bridge to the Thorns had declared independence and walked away. My mother began calling me relentlessly, demanding to know how I'd met Julian Thorne again. "It was just a follow-up from the presentation, Mother," I said calmly. "You need to introduce him to Clara," she insisted. "This is the family's chance. Don't be selfish, Alara." "He's a very busy man," I demurred, enjoying her frustration. But I knew I had to let them have their meeting. It was a necessary part of the plan. I reluctantly agreed to arrange an introduction at an upcoming museum benefit. The night of the benefit was pure theater. Clara arrived looking like a movie star, dripping in jewels our father couldn't afford. She zeroed in on Julian, laying on the charm thick and fast. I stepped back and watched. Julian was polite, of course, but I could see a subtle stiffness in his posture. He had now spent weeks talking to me, sharing genuine conversations. Clara's superficial chatter about fashion and gossip clearly bored him. This was where Phase 3 began. I didn't need to expose Clara, I just needed to give her the stage and she would perform beautifully. Over the next few months, I orchestrated several situations where Julian could observe Clara's true character. I knew from my past life that Clara had once volunteered at a children's charity auction, only to spend the whole time taking selfies and complaining about the cheap wine. I made a significant anonymous donation to that same charity, ensuring Julian would be the guest of honor at their next event. I suggested to my mother that it would be a wonderful opportunity for Clara to impress him. As predicted, Clara put on the same dismal performance. I saw Julian watching her, a look of distinct disappointment on his face, as she ignored a small child tugging on her sleeve to ask for a photo. Later, I let it slip to Clara that Julian was a secret admirer of a niche, avant-garde artist. Clara, desperate to seem sophisticated, spent a small fortune on a piece of the artist's work to give to Julian as a gift. What she didn't know, but I did, was that Julian's late grandmother had despised this artist, considering his work a derivative insult to classicism. Julian's appreciation for the artist was a rumor planted by a rival years ago. When Clara presented the gift, Julian's polite smile was paper thin. He saw a shallow attempt to curry favor, not a genuine gesture. With every misstep she made, I was there in the background, a study in contrast. I discussed business strategy with him. I remembered the name of his childhood dog. I challenged his ideas and respected his vision. Our relationship deepened, moving from friendship into something more. The evenings we spent together became the center of my world. Not because he was Julian Thorne, the heir, but because he was Julian, the man who saw me, The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when my father's business, propped up by the hope of a Thorn alliance, finally collapsed. He was facing bankruptcy. The creditors were circling. My mother was hysterical. They came to my apartment for the first time ever, not to criticize, but to beg. "You have to do something, Alara," my mother cried. "You're close to him. You have to convince him to help us, for the family." "He needs to marry Clara," my father blurted out, his face ashen. "The merger of the families would save us. It's the only way." They looked at me with desperate, greedy eyes. They still saw me as a tool, a means to an end. The last vestiges of any daughterly obligation I might have felt turned to dust. I went to see Julian that night. I told him everything. Not about my rebirth, but about my life. About the stolen art prize, the stolen university admission, the years of being a ghost. And I told him what my family was demanding of me now. He listened without interruption, his expression hardening into granite. When I finished, he reached across the table and took my hand. His touch was warm and steady. "They will not get a single cent from me," he said, his voice low and firm. "And they will not get you. I've known for a while now, Alara. I've seen the way they treat you. I've seen who you are, and I've seen who she is." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "However," he said, turning back to me, a glint in his eye I hadn't seen before, "my board has been pushing for an alliance with a smaller, local company to handle our regional distribution. Your father's company, on paper, is a perfect fit. They believe a marriage would seal the deal nicely." My heart sank. "Julian, Let me finish," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I think we should give them exactly what they want. Let's announce our engagement." I stared at him, confused. "Our engagement?" "No," he corrected himself, walking back towards me. "Not ours, my engagement, to Clara Vance." And then he laid out the rest of the plan. A plan so audacious, so beautifully, poetically cruel, that I knew in that moment I was not just falling for him. I was in awe of him. He wasn't just my ally, he was my partner. He understood that simple revenge wasn't enough. It had to be a masterpiece. The announcement of Clara's engagement to Julian Thorne was the biggest news of the year. My family exploded with joy. They were saved. My father was giddy, my mother was insufferably triumphant, and Clara ascended to a new plane of arrogance. She became untouchable, a goddess descending from on high to grace the city with her presence. To the world, and especially to my family, I was the jilted, pathetic sister. The one who had tried and failed to catch the billionaire, only to watch him choose her dazzling sibling. My mother took great pleasure in rubbing it in. "You see, Alara, quality always wins. Clara was born for this life. You need to learn your place." I played my part perfectly. I was quiet, withdrawn, and mournful. I allowed them to pity me, to gloat over me. It fed their egos and made them blind. Inside, I was a coiled spring of anticipation. Julian and I met in secret, our bond forged in the fires of our shared conspiracy. He handled the business side, drawing up contracts with my father's company that were full of ironclad clauses and performance benchmarks he knew my father could never meet. I handled the personal side, helping Clara plan her wedding. I endured endless meetings with florists and caterers, offering suggestions I knew she would reject out of spite. "Oh, lilies are a beautiful choice for the arrangements," I'd say. "Of course, if you want something more unique, you could consider orchids." She would immediately choose lilies just to do the opposite of what I suggested. I guided her towards the most ostentatious, most expensive, and most publicly visible options for everything. The venue was the city's grandest ballroom. The guest list was a who's who of society and media, and the dress. The dress was a monstrous confection of silk and lace that cost more than a house. She was building her own stage, and I was happily handing her the hammer and nails. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of fake smiles and simmering rage. Clara treated me like her personal assistant, barking orders and insulting my taste. "Try to wear something decent to the wedding, Alara," she said one afternoon while being fitted for her gown. "I know you don't have much money, but please don't embarrass me." I just smiled serenely and nodded. Behind the scenes, Julian and I were meticulously preparing for the final act. Our own legal arrangements were made quietly through a lawyer loyal to the Thorne family. We obtained our marriage license in a neighboring state under a veil of corporate privacy. The officiant for the wedding, a retired judge and an old friend of the Thorne family, was brought into our confidence. The documents that would be on the table for the public signing were prepared. There were two sets. One, a decorative ceremonial certificate with Clara's name on it. The other, the legally binding document, bore my name. The day of the wedding arrived bright and clear. Our house was chaos. Stylists, makeup artists, and photographers swarmed around Clara. She was in her element, preening and posing. My mother fluttered around her, weeping tears of joy. "My beautiful daughter," she kept saying. "You've made all my dreams come true." My father stood by, beaming in a rented tuxedo, already talking like he was a captain of industry. I dressed quietly in my own room. I had chosen a simple, elegant dress in a deep sapphire blue. When I emerged, my mother gave me a look of disapproval. "You couldn't have worn a lighter color? You look like you're going to a funeral." "I just wanted to make sure Clara was the only one in white," I said sweetly. At the venue, the air was thick with the scent of expensive flowers and anticipation. Hundreds of guests milled about, their diamonds and jewels glittering under the chandeliers. This was it, the culmination of months of planning, the climax of my second life. I took my place in the front row, the dutiful, overlooked sister. The music swelled and the great doors opened. Clara glided down the aisle on our father's arm, her face a mask of triumphant beauty. When she reached the altar, she looked at Julian with an expression of pure ownership. Julian, for his part, was a brilliant actor. He looked at her with what appeared to be adoration, taking her hand. The ceremony was a blur of traditional vows and flowery language. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat counting down the seconds. Then came the moment. The officiant gestured to the ornate table beside the altar. "And now, the signing of the registry, which will legally bind this union." Julian signed first, his signature a bold, decisive slash of ink. Then, he and the officiant subtly shifted the documents. The decorative certificate was moved aside, and the real one was placed before Clara. But Clara wasn't looking at the paper. She was looking at the cameras, smiling brilliantly for the photographers who were jostling for position. She picked up the pen, and without a single glance at the words on the page, she signed the witness line on the document that legally declared me, Elara Vance, as the wife of Julian Thorne. My father, blinded by pride and flashbulbs, did the same. It was done. They turned back to face the crowd. The officiant, his voice booming through the ballroom, made the final pronouncement. "It is my distinct honor and great pleasure to present to you for the first time as husband and wife, Mr. Julian Thorne and Mrs. Elara Thorne." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. They had misheard. Surely he had misspoken. Clara's smile froze on her face. She turned to the officiant, her expression bewildered. "What did you say?" My mother's face went white. My father stared, his mouth agape. The officiant smiled benignly. "I said, Mrs. Elara Thorne. It is written here on the legally binding marriage certificate, signed by all relevant parties. Perhaps you should have a look." Julian turned, his adoring gaze no longer on Clara, but on me in the front row. He extended his hand. "Elara, my dear, would you join your husband?" Slowly, I rose from my seat and walked towards the altar. The entire ballroom was silent, a collective intake of breath. I walked past my sister, whose face was crumbling from confusion into dawning, horrific understanding. I took Julian's hand. He squeezed it gently. Clara finally looked down at the certificate. She saw my name. A sound escaped her lips, a choked, strangled gasp of disbelief. "No, no, this is a mistake. That's my name. I'm the bride." "No, you're not," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the officiant's microphone. "You never were." That's when the dam of my family's composure broke. "What is the meaning of this?" my mother shrieked, rushing towards the altar. "This is our daughter's wedding." "Actually," Julian said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade, "it's my wedding. And this," he said, pulling me closer to his side, "is my wife." He gestured to the large screens on either side of the ballroom, which until now had been showing a romantic slideshow of him and Clara. The images vanished, replaced by documents. A copy of the official marriage certificate with my name and Julian's signature clear for all to see. Then, another document appeared. Evidence of the fraudulent application my mother had submitted to my university years ago, along with a sworn affidavit from the registrar. Next, a series of bank statements appeared, showing funds being funneled from my father's company into my mother's personal accounts, money that was supposed to go to creditors. It was the evidence I had been gathering for months, a portfolio of their greed and deceit. The Vance family sought an alliance with my company, Julian announced, his voice ringing with cold authority. They offered up a daughter. They just happened to offer up the wrong one. They offered me a fraud, a plagiarist, and a thief. Each word was a hammer blow. I, on the other hand, chose a brilliant, resilient, and honest woman. I chose Alara. The crowd erupted in frantic whispers. Cameras flashed, capturing every second of my family's public vivisection. Clara was shaking her head, her eyes wide with horror, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "He was supposed to be mine," she wailed, a raw, primal scream of thwarted greed. She lunged towards me, her hands clawed, but Julian's security team, who had been posing as guests, intercepted her instantly. My father staggered, clutching his chest, while my mother stood frozen, her face a rictus of pure hatred. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw not a mother, but a murderer, furious that her victim had refused to stay dead. I looked out at the ruins of my family. Clara, sobbing and hysterical, being restrained by security. My mother, pale and shaking with rage. My father, looking like his world had just ended, which it had. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only the clean, cold, satisfying click of a lock falling into place. "Enjoy the party," I said into the microphone, my voice echoing in the stunned silence. "It's all been paid for." Then, hand in hand with my husband, I turned my back on them and walked away, leaving them to be devoured by the scandal they had created. The last thing I heard before the ballroom doors closed was the sound of my sister crying. The aftermath was swift and total. The story of the wedding day swap was a media sensation, a modern-day fairy tale with a vicious twist. We didn't have to fan the flames. My family's spectacular implosion did the work for us. Clara's public breakdown was just the beginning. The humiliation of being left at the altar in front of everyone she had ever wanted to impress shattered her fragile ego completely. She refused to leave her room, then the house, consumed by a cycle of rage and despair. The girl who had lived her life as the center of attention could not bear a world that was laughing at her. Within a few months, after a particularly violent outburst, she was admitted to a private long-term psychiatric facility. Her beauty, which had been her only real currency, faded behind a veil of medication and misery. I heard she spent her days staring at the walls, whispering a name that was no longer hers to claim, Mrs. Thorne. My mother's fate was a social death. The women she had desperately clawed her way up to join now shunned her. She was a pariah, the villain in the city's favorite gossip story. The evidence of fraud that Julian had displayed at the wedding led to an official investigation. Faced with insurmountable debt and public disgrace, her friends melted away. She had to sell her home, her jewelry, her designer clothes, everything she had valued. She ended up in a small rented apartment on the poor side of town, a bitter, lonely woman with nothing but her resentment to keep her warm. My father was ruined. The contracts Julian had signed with him were, as planned, impossible to fulfill. Invoking the performance clauses, the Thorne Corporation legally absorbed his company's remaining assets to cover the default, leaving him with nothing but personal debt. Bankrupt and abandoned by his social climbing wife, he was forced to take a menial job as a logistics clerk in a warehouse, a cruel irony that was not lost on me. He was just another faceless employee in the vast empire now co-owned by the daughter he had neglected. And me? My life began. The love between Julian and me, born from a shared conspiracy, blossomed into something deep and genuine. He wasn't just my partner in revenge. He was my partner in life. He cherished my mind, celebrated my ambition, and healed the old wounds with a tenderness I had never known. He had chosen me not when I was a dazzling success, but when I was a girl with a secret and a plan, and for that, my loyalty to him was absolute. I didn't sit back and simply enjoy the thorn fortune. I used the capital from my stock market victory and the resources of my new family to launch my own architectural design firm, something I had only dreamed of in my first life. Vance Thorn Designs quickly became a leader in sustainable and innovative building. My work celebrated for the very creativity my family had tried to steal from me. I was no longer a ghostwriter for someone else's success. I was the author of my own. A year after the wedding, Julian and I stood on the balcony of our home, overlooking the city. The lights twinkled below, a sea of infinite possibilities. My past life, with its pain and shadows, felt like a distant, half-forgotten nightmare. The rage had cooled, leaving behind not emptiness, but a profound and lasting peace. I had not just survived. I had triumphed. I had taken back my name, my dream, my life. "Are you happy, Ilara?" Julian asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "More than I ever thought possible," I whispered. Justice had been served. The scales, so horribly imbalanced for so long, had finally been set right. My family was in the hell they had built for me, and I was finally free.